Welcome to today's edition of Around the WaterCooler. My name is David Savage. I'm your host for today's conversation, where we're going to be talking about the age of digital voice and how it is approaching. To do that, we've got three guests, three panelists, far more level of expertise amongst them than from me. So I will very quickly hand over to each of you, get you to introduce yourselves, and then we'll dive into the conversation proper. First of all, John, you are to the left of my screen. So would you mind just telling us who you are and what you do?
My name's John Stenton. I'm the head of IT for Thrive Homes, which is a housing association in Hemel Hempstead. I joined Thrive 4 years ago, and within the first year, I took them off PSTN and put them onto Skype for Business, for a lot of the reasons we'll be talking about later on today.
Thank you. Adam, you are next on my screen.
Hi, I'm Adam Miller. I'm the Associate Engineering Director at MOO Print Limited. I've been there for about 18 months. We're an entirely digital voice organisation, but in previous lifetimes, I've moved organisations from PSTN to digital, and looking forward to telling you about all the benefits of digital voice.
And then lastly, we've got Dave Christie.
Hi, I'm David Christie. I work for Virgin Media O2, and I'm in the regulatory and public policy team. So we advise the business on major regulatory changes. And one of those is the current project to move customers from PSTN voice to IP voice.
So okay, it makes sense probably to start with you, Dave, and I suppose ask the regulatory question. You know, is the analog switch off really happening? And if it is, when is it happening?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So first of all, a very big yes, the analog switch off is really happening. And the underlying reason for that is a lot of the technology that powers PSTN, the analog network that we've been relying on for fixed line voice telephony for years, is very much reaching end of life. So switch manufacturers are reducing the level of support they can provide. Spare parts are becoming less available. An engineering resource with the knowledge of maintaining PSTN is also retiring, to be polite. So this is something that's facing all telcos, both in UK and around the world. And we are reacting to that. If we did nothing, if it was simply to let the PSTN carry on, it would gradually become more and more unreliable as those difficulties, lack of parts, lack of engineers, become more and more of a reality. So that's the driver. We need to move over to IP voice, digital voice, as do all the other CPs in the UK. In terms of timing, again, really, really good question. So the biggest provider of wholesale voice lines in the UK is Openreach. So not Virgin Media O2, although we come a pretty good second. And Openreach have publicly announced that they are withdrawing their wholesale voice product portfolio by the end of 2025. So that's a date that might be familiar to lots of people who hear a snippet here and a snippet there of that. But that's the end date. So that's the withdrawal of all services by Openreach. Now, what we're doing, we're facing those same challenges in terms of technology, is we're looking to migrate our customer base between now, so we started last year with migrations 2021, through to around about 2025 over to IP voice. So the big issue is that this is not something that will happen in 4 years' time. This is something that will happen, is happening today, and will continue to happen over the next 4 years.
So I suppose, look, the interesting follow-up here would be, and we will get into the opportunities, I suppose, that are present there for businesses with John and Adam in a minute. But in my mind, I would have assumed that a lot of customers had already taken that journey that John and Adam have taken, but you wouldn't be here talking on this panel if that were the case. I mean, how many businesses roughly have actually made this transition? How many have still got to do it?
No, you're absolutely right, David. And IP voice is a real staple product already of businesses up and down the country. but there's still an awful lot of analog lines out there. So just adding together consumers and businesses for a moment to give you a big figure, there's 30 million exchange lines in the country that need to be migrated across from analog to IP technology. So that's a big ask. Now, most of those will be single lines into people's homes. Residential use is far more PSTN based, but there's still an awful lot of lines that are used by businesses, both for voice lines, low bandwidth data, lots of different use cases. So it is really important that businesses understand what they have today and what they need to do to make sure they've got the best capabilities going forward.
John, I mean, look, you have done this, and Dave there teed up the point about business. What were the challenges that you faced when trying to migrate your business 3-4 years ago that people should be aware of?
The challenge for me was more around not the technology, but the people. It was convincing my exec team that it was the right thing to do, but the outages we were having on the PSTN lines really, really helped my case. But from a technology point of view, there was very little. There's just benefits that come all over the place. You're using your existing internet connections. You've got guaranteed quality of service. And then you can start, when you really start getting clever with Teams, you can do so much more with it. If you're linking it in, you can do sentiment analysis for the customer calls and how well they receive what information they're being told over the phone, how well they feel about it. You can understand exactly who's calling you and why. I think there's so many more benefits just from a data point of view than PSTN. You just get no stats as PSTN other than waiting times.
So look, surely the last 2 years has made that argument with people easier, because now that we're all having to be at home and remote, any of those arguments that you might have seen maybe 3 or 4 years ago surely have been made to look somewhat antique.
Hey, my business is converted.
I'm talking more generally to the audience who maybe haven't translated.
I've got a feeling that most of the businesses that haven't transitioned are the smaller ones that think it's going to cost them more than it's worth. I'm going to do it right at the last minute. But I have no stats on that at all. That is purely my feeling. I mean, Dave could probably tell us better, but Adam, you've converted as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean,
you're on Teams now?
Well, we use a combination of IP phones with Slack and Zoom as well. But that was a really interesting point about how the last 2 years has really affected us. And for me, the analogy I have is an experience of a disaster recovery situation where I had a customer contact center at a previous company flooded, and we had to immediately shut down the offices, shut down all power in the offices. Literally, there was a foot of water in the customer contact center, and had to try and get up and running again as a business with our customer contact center as quickly as possible, while on old PSTN technology. And that was an incredibly painful experience. You know, it impacted us as a business for many weeks while we tried to come up with solutions. And, you know, even then, our only option was to create new space, but in one place. You know, we had no options for individuals to work from home, for example. Now, you know, when we had the kind of go home message for the beginning of the pandemic, setting up customer service agents at home via IP was incredibly quick and incredibly easy. The teams were able to change their ways of working to a fully mobile way of working very, very quickly. You know, we literally had downtime of probably a day, you know, and more of that time was about understanding the change in process, you know, the way that customer service agents would access the system, how they would divide up the work, etc. The technical issues were basically non-existent. So that's always been the benchmark for me about how transformative this technology has been in terms of our ability to work from anywhere. And of course, that translates into ongoing business flexibility in terms of if you're trying to source additional people for your teams, if you're looking to change your hours of operation, and you might wish to move to a different location for where the time zone works better for those times. The technology becomes a non-issue in those plans. You know, they're much more focused about how do you actually get the people than how do you provision the technology. The technology becomes reasonably trivial at that point.
So I suppose that kind of cost and availability being the two drivers for most people who haven't made this migration. One of the things that we need to make sure kind of people have an understanding of, so they're prepared, is to know what you have. I imagine that the technology teams they've known what their estates look like, but the last 2 years, again, to the people outside of the technology department are now much more invested in knowing or understanding what their business has. Has that actually been rather helpful in describing the situation that you were talking about there, Adam?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, that incident that we had where our customer contact center flooded was, a defining point in that organization's decision to move to digital IP, and we moved very rapidly to it because it became very real. Well, of course, now we've had something that's global, and that everybody has experienced, and so everybody is now much more focused and much more aware of those benefits. They can understand them in tangible terms, rather than the rather, kind of esoteric or hypothetical terms that IT was trying to describe them previously. So, yes, you take your silver linings from any clouds that you can when you get them, and certainly the business understands and is willing to invest where necessary. But crucially, we're also seeing some fairly big cost savings as well through using this technology.
Dave, I suppose the interesting question to ask you would be then, has the sponsor or the stakeholder that you're dealing with changed over the last couple of years? I suppose that back at the beginning of this process, for a lot of organizations, you would have been talking to John or Adam when going through these transitions or migrations. Is it now that it's not actually necessarily even being driven by the technology leaders? Business leaders have understood. That's not to say that technology is not a business leader, of course, but more broadly speaking, business leaders now get this too, and could well be driving the conversation and the changes that you're looking, those organizations rather need to happen.
Yeah, I mean, the flexibility that businesses have needed to adopt over the last couple of years, I think, has really, driven to the centre the need to be agile and over a number of different issues. But telephony comms definitely is one of them. So, that's quite useful in the sense that it drives the debate. So we want people to be asking questions to say, well, I'm not sure my service is actually fit for my needs today, and that might be by virtue of the pandemic. What can I do to optimize my business? Well, that's exactly why the CPs are there, to try and say, we want to work with you guys and give you the best opportunity to do what your business wants to do in the best possible way. So that's been really useful. And, I agree. I think most of the benefits that you get by taking an integrated IP service are there to be seen. There are one or two use cases that exist where you've got analog pieces of equipment that people will use across analog telephone lines. And will it work over a new digital line? So those are the sort of edge cases that we just need to be careful with. And again, that's part of that conversation we'd like to have with our customers and potential customers, and say, let's work through the whole scheme and give you the warnings as to what you can and the edge cases where it might be a bit more difficult, but we'll come up with a solution for you.
So look, John, if we're addressing the audience that hasn't made that migration yet, and you're someone who has and has seen the benefits, I mean, are the edge cases, are they something that you've seen, or is it just been opportunity? I mean, what would you say to those people still to make the migration? What are the opportunities they're missing out on?
They need to start looking at it as soon as possible, really, because it's not something you're going to do overnight. So, as always, fail to prepare and prepare to fail. So get in there soon and start thinking about it. But the advantages are the guaranteed quality of service for me. The PSTN was flaky. I know it's not supposed to be, but it is. But I've not fully migrated everything yet. I still have a couple of lifts on phone lines. They still need working out how I get a SIM in there or some other method of communication. So I'm sure Dave and I can have a chat at some point.
We've heard about lifts, that's for sure.
But there's still residential broadband out there as well, which I'm not sure how that's going to work, because that last mile is still that old copper.
That's an interesting point. I mean, if we do come back to that very quickly, Adam, your business you have only ever used digital in your
Indeed,
current
yeah.
role.
Yeah.
And yet you are dealing with people like me who, to be perfectly frank, don't have a clue what they're going on about around this kind of stuff. And they are sitting at home and they don't know what's getting their internet to their house, and they don't know if it needs changing or not. Is that a risk for you as a business, given that it's not quite as controlled an environment as it used to be?
I think we have a couple of mitigations against that risk. Firstly, we do have a reasonably tech-savvy workforce. We've always worked hard to be transparent and supportive in IT, so we try and help people understand why certain technology challenges exist. But the other advantage that certainly I've encountered since I joined MOO, which is different from many of the other organisations, is because there's been no legacy PSTN or traditional telephony in place. A lot of the things that previous companies' employees were telling me were must-haves, in terms of functionality, they just don't exist at MOO. So voicemail is just a non-issue, for example, at MOO. If you don't get through to communicate with somebody via voice, you send them a Slack message. So the culture of the organisation, the way that the organisation has grown up with telephony, with communication generally, has a big impact on that. And many times in previous organisations, the biggest hurdles, the last holdouts, if you like, for the migration to digital IP were very much, I'm wedded to this way of working, and this way of working is going to be interrupted by this change to IP, because that fax machine in one case was still something that they relied on, for example. Those kinds of things are the things that people say they can't imagine the change in their own work to enable this technology change. At MOO, it's very much an example of how, if you've never had it, you don't need it, you don't wish for it, and you don't miss it. So it can be very challenging, but one challenge I would set for people is to have a look at the opportunities to reduce the complexity of what they offer in terms of services to their end users. Actually think about, are the things that you provide right now, do they need an exact replica in the IP world, or actually are there things that you're just doing because they've always been that way, and that you can remove those and simplify your estate as part of doing this?
Look, we're out of time for today's discussion. I have to be honest, it was way livelier than I was necessarily expecting it to be. I imagine that the conversation will continue after we hit stop on record. But thank you, each of you, for joining us for today's session.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David.
And thank you to everyone watching. I hope you've enjoyed this edition of Around the WaterCooler. Please do stay on the CIO WaterCooler website. Have a look around. There is plenty more content to enjoy.